Good evening and welcome to UXDX Community USA West Coast. And my name is Jovi, and while I usually look after the events and operations for UXDX, tonight I am your humble host. With our community events, we're building a global community of product development professionals in UX, design, product, and engineering, where you can continuously learn best practices and keep up to date with new trends in the industry. So before we start tonight, I'm going to run through some housekeeping for this event and a short background on UXDX. If you have any questions for the speakers at any point this evening, please share them on the chat box to the right side of this video. The UXDX team will be monitoring them throughout the evening. We will always aim to answer as many questions as we can, but just in case we do run out of time, you can use the UXDX community Slack chat, which everyone should have been added to, or you can add to through our website. So more specifically, you should send your questions in the channel called Ask the Speakers. Make sure to tag all the speakers directly so they can respond to you. So I know the thing that we all miss with live events is meeting people and building relationships. So at the end of this event, do join us at GatherTown. It's a way for us to network, meet the speakers and the other attendees at this event. My team will be sharing the link on the chat box in the Slack channel afterwards. But it's a great way to meet everyone and just have a casual conversation. But before we start, what is UXDX? Our mission at UXDX is to help organizations shift from delivering software from project autonomous product teams. And we believe that shifting from project to product is the best way to deliver on this mission. So how do we deliver on this mission? So the first is we promote and really push for cross-functional teams. The best teams work together, but often they learn separately. So with this sets unnecessary boundaries and counterproductive barriers. At all of our events, we get the full team involved. This includes UX researchers, product designers, product managers, and engineers. This allows a breakdown between the silos and really allows the team to learn together and learn each other's challenges, which at the end builds empathy towards each other's roles. After all, if you all need to work collaboratively together, you all need to learn what each role is responsible for. Second, the talks are always case study driven. And the reason for this is that only through execution that we can really see where the challenges are. Our speakers, especially tonight, will share their full journeys, including their challenges, so that you can avoid them and then you can put that theory into action. And lastly, support. At UXDX, we want to continue to support you and your good intentions even after the event. We do this by giving you access to our full breadth of knowledge center, where you can watch all the talks we've hosted in the last 7 years at all of our events. So you can get a refresher and be continued to be motivated at any time. But we also know that motivation alone isn't enough. So we're also working on a framework to help transform that motivation into change. But enough about us. I know you didn't come here to listen to me talk. Let's get started on why you all have signed up for our event. And I know it's actually really not to listen to me, but to listen to all our amazing speakers tonight. So we'll start the evening with a series of rapid fire Q&As on the on-demand sessions that were released yesterday morning. So from Kendall Avery, lead researcher for Uber, Homer Gaines, staff UI engineer and accessibility professional for Guru, and Zi Zheng, a design ops lead for Cloudflare. Hosted by our co-founder, Rory Madden. This is the time for you to send through the questions you have for each of the speakers. So first off.
Yeah, thank you, Jovi. And I just got word, unfortunately, as always this happens, we're having some technical difficulties with the website. So if you have any issues, just Catherine is on chat to help out with that. So apologies for technical difficulties, but more importantly, hello and welcome, Kendall.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Excellent. So I really enjoyed your talk, and the purpose of this session now is that I'm just going to ask a few questions, but if anybody in the audience has any questions that they want to send through as well, I'll ask Kendall those questions. So let's jump right in.
Yeah.
So designing a remote participatory design study, really enjoyed the talk. I loved how honest you were about how everything was new and you were kind of learning as you went. as it was new, what would you have done previously when faced with this kind of challenge?
Yeah, I think one of the extra challenges was, remote everything makes it a little bit harder to connect with people. And it's the kind of thing that I had seen examples of this done before by other people on the team, but not people that I'd ever met before. Just I had seen their research done and I was like, okay, this has existed, but it has only existed in person. I think I wish I would have had a greater community. I did a lot of Google searching of how have other people done this? Does it exist? It felt a little bit too new, or at least too new to me. But I really wish I would have had a community of people to be like, oh my gosh, you've run this before. What were your pros and cons? What are some ways that I can, learn from your mistakes? And, what are some ways that I can do it a little bit differently? I did reach out to a lot of my colleagues internally who would run workshops that had been done remotely that would have traditionally been done in person. But yeah, I think I wish I would have just had more people to go to and just kind of bounce ideas off of. But because it was so new in general, or at least to the audience that I was kind of working with, it felt a little bit more of, let's just try it out and hope it works.
Excellent. And yeah, so it seemed to from your story, it was a great kind of walking through it and some of the challenges that you faced. Was it difficult to convince people to kind of give it a shot, or who did you have to convince?
Yeah, well, myself first, that it was the right thing to do, that it was the right method, because there's always that imposter syndrome that creeps in of did I even know enough about this method to pitch it? And so I think that was the first convincing. But in general, with a couple of my studies that I've done, where they've been maybe non-traditional methods, so things that go beyond interviews and usability studies, that's traditionally when I'm working with my design and product partners, what's requested when they say, hey, can we do some UX research? And so it's a little bit of convincing to say yes, but is this the right way that we can answer this question? And so there was a little bit of hesitation, I think, from the team of saying, well, do we really want to just let people design this home screen? Is that really what we're going to learn best out of it? And I think the biggest pushback was, well, we're not going to use those designs, so why would we even ask them to do it in the first place? And so the convincing really was more on the rationale behind the method and why we were doing it, that it wasn't just the surface level we were looking for these designs, but it was really that level beneath it of why were they creating these designs? And I think once we aligned everyone around that why, that this method was just a way to get us there, we seemed to have a lot of folks on board. We also included some things that were familiar too. We started off with an interview at the beginning of each session. So there was a little bit of familiarity of, okay, this is running how research normally runs. It's not totally, brand new and I feel uncomfortable observing. And then that's another piece, is having the team sit in and observe. I think, it becomes less of me being that translator of, I talked to some people, I created a report, and now I'm sharing it out to you, but really kind of bringing them in and almost convincing them that way too. But I did have it in my back pocket of, oh my gosh, if this completely fails, I'll need to have a nice backup plan so that I can still have the team on board and they'll still ask for research.
Great. And that was the interviews up front. Was that your backup, or what was your backup plan?
I think it would have ended up being having some design. So our design team already had design ideas. And that was something that, I thought about, well, should we just show the ideas? But I wanted to make sure that we weren't relying too much on our own assumptions. It's easy to design for the ideal user and the ideal use case, especially when you're sitting at home and designing only with Figma and not with real people. And so I wanted to make sure that I could give that opportunity for people to tell us what mattered most to them, show us what mattered most to them. But if this completely failed and it really wasn't going to get us those insightful data points that we were looking for, it was still going to be worthwhile to put these concepts in front of users, talk to them, get a little bit of feedback from them. But I just felt like there was more opportunity that we could have explored. And I think it ended up being really beneficial for our team.
Great. And so you mentioned that some people were quite they almost rebuilt the existing UI. So how did you try to coax people out of that comfort zone of just, okay, when I open up the app, this is what I see, so this is what I'm familiar with. to try to really get an understanding of, well, what could it be?
Yeah, well, you know what was interesting about that was we actually, after designing the screen, I'd ask a question of, well, how do you think this compares to your current experience? And that's the moment that they would look and say, oh my gosh, it's exactly the same. So they didn't even realize that they were doing this, which I took away as such a strong insight that, you know, some of these, the ways that we think about our products and our apps and the things that we use become so second nature that we almost don't even understand the why behind it. And so asking them to create the screen, even though it ended up looking familiar to them, it was still helping me understand what about each of those components they brought on, why was it important? Because that's really what we were looking for, was the why for everything. We also found some interesting insights of, you know, people seeing something for the very first time and then looking at their phone and saying, oh, it's been there the whole time, I never knew it. And so just realizing how strong some of these patterns can be that we you know, get into a routine, we use a thing a certain way. Discovery has been a big topic of discussion. How do we get people to discover things and what's the right way to do that? And I thought it was actually okay that they ended up creating the same screens, because that was a good signal to us that what we thought was working maybe wasn't having the same impact as we'd hoped. And it really kind of forced us to take a look at other different directions we could go.
Excellent. And I guess it's a familiar pushback for research. You had 19 participants. How many people, or did you get the pushback that, what does 19 tell us?
We did. I would almost say 19 was like more than we would normally do, which I think ended up feeling okay. I think one of the reasons that felt okay was because we tested in multiple markets. And so originally the study was actually 8 participants in the US, 8 participants in Mexico. And that was when we had only tested with Rides users. And we saw this theme that was coming out and we were like, you know what, we should double check with our Eats users too, to see if the same theme is there. And so we actually added those 3 Eats only users to see if that pattern was there. And it was, for me, I was concerned, like, this is only 3 people. Is that enough? And I'm sure that's the opposite pushback that we get of like, is it enough? And it ended up actually being that those 3 people had such strong signal to confirm some of the other insights that we'd gotten from the other participants, that it was like, no, this is really a strong theme that we're seeing here. And so I think once you're able to kind of show your team, and this is the importance of bringing your team along into those interviews and into those sessions with you, is when they can start to see the saturation hit of, I've talked to 4 people and we've seen the same thing every single time, or, you know, by the 8th participant, you're really not getting that much new information. When you can see it happen, it's a lot easier to believe that 19 people is enough. But absolutely, we get that pushback all the time. And it's one of the reasons we partner really closely with our data science teams to make sure that we can get that triangulation of, I talked to 19 people here, but look, here's 100,000 people and they're saying the same thing, just you know, in a different way.
Excellent. Yeah, I love the measure, how to measure anything. And it's kind of, even if you just get one piece of information, it can be hugely insightful if you have nothing so far. So the last question, we only have a minute, but you alluded to it was a change in strategy, but how do you solve that problem of, you have so many offerings and you only have like a small bit of space? Is there any insightful tips you could give to other people facing a similar issue?
I think the biggest thing that our team is learning is prioritization, just really getting crisp on what does the user care about, what does the business care about, and then really figuring out how do you focus and prioritize. We've been circling around this topic for a while now, and I think one of the biggest things we keep coming back to is, what's our vision, what's our strategy? And if we can just prioritize and focus on delivering a great experience for one of these offerings or 2 of these offerings, we can start to figure out how do we scale that way. But it felt a little bit like we were kind of, we say boiling the ocean a little bit, of trying to tackle too much at once and saying, how do you expand to all these different product areas at the same time? And so really thinking about, where's the right place to focus, where are you going to have the most impact? And then, you know, building off of that and taking those learnings and applying it to the next version of growth for your company. So that's we're still using the insights. I pulled them up today with the team. We walked through them again. They're still having a lot of impact, but the prioritization is definitely critical.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your talk and for your questions. And look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thanks
Thank you, Kendall. So now, jumping quickly on, we're going to talk with Zed about building design ops as a team of one. So welcome, Zed.
Hello. Thanks for having me here.
Great. Sorry, is it Zed or Z?
I go by Z, but this is a really interesting subject to start. Even we have a global team, so my EMEA friends always call me Zed, and then my US friends always call me Z.
So I'll go with Z, but yeah, apologies coming from EMEA. It's my default.
No problem.
So I'm just going to jump right in. But again, if anybody has any questions, please do throw them in, and I'll ask them. So jumping right in, you mentioned that you chose, when you got this new role with Cloudflare, you chose to change your title from kind of being a design lead to being design ops. Why did the title matter? Like, why not just do what you're doing, but with the old title?
Yeah, title doesn't matter, but how people perceive it matters. So design operation is it's not a new practice because there's always someone doing the design operations work for a long time. But design operation as a practice and as a title, as a profession, it's rather new. So changing the title gives me the tool to advocate for design operation, to talk about what it is. So that's when the title matters.
Excellent. And I guess one of the things that you said, the most important thing, and I think this is true for any role, is kind of meet the people. Like when you're starting out, just get to know all the different people. And you put together, one of your slides was, okay, depending on the role, these were their needs. And then you said you prioritized. So what's going through my head is you've met all these people brand new, and then you've kind of just said, look, that's not important right now. So how do you manage that as kind of somebody new coming into a role? You believe this is the most important thing. So that involves telling other people, listen, I can't do your thing at the moment, but I'll get to it.
Yeah, so that it kind of maps back to that talk about building the trust first. You have to build the trust that people can talk to you, can listen to you as well. And the next step is also what we're talking about, really to look at the needs of the people as a group, and also look at the business needs as well, right? So, and then the third thing is that I talk a lot about bringing people along the way. And it's not, I decided your work, it's your need, it's not as important as their need. It's really getting together as a group, outlined it. These are the things that we need to do, and this is how we prioritize it. And then people can see what you're doing, and then you talk about why this is more important. This is a bigger needs on the team, and then also this has a higher impact for the team, and then hence that's the prioritized work I need to do.
Excellent. And did you have anybody kind of give you different feedback? So when you said, look, this is how I've analyzed it and this is my prioritization, did everyone accept that, or did you get a bit of a kind of back and forth with people?
Not always like everyone can be aligned. There's always a back forth. It's a discussion. It's always a discussion. That also maps back into how do I roll it out? I can't just say, hey, everyone, all 20 of you start to do this, right? That's why we start very small, try with a small group, and then get the people who are doing this, experiencing this with you, and then talk about this, and then spread it out to the larger team. So there's always a conversation. It's a conversation.
Great. And you mentioned one of the key themes that I would say in your talk was the strategic partner of design ops with the design lead. So in my head now, and because as you mentioned, it's quite new, I've heard conflicting kind of things that the design lead is the people side of things and the design ops is the system side of things. But then in your talk, you said that design ops has both the team and the the process ops in it. So where do you see the delineation between your design lead and your design ops?
Part of the thing in one of the slides I mentioned that what do we see our design leaders need to do, right? If we think about our design leaders' task, their task is less about managing internally, managing the designers. It's more of talking about design, advocate for design, talk about what is the design team's strategy, what is the product strategy. And then for a design ops person, when I come in, I'm the counterpart. I'm the 80-20, the other, whichever the design leader is looking for that 80% outwards communication, I'm looking into the 80% inwards communication, balance it out. And then helping a lot of logistics. I think about design operation, I talk about people, process, and tools. People is the center. Everything we do, we need to support the needs of our people. So design op is the bridge between the people and also the organization. So that's how I see design ops fit.
Excellent. And then with that structure, so I guess people are moving more to product teams and reporting to products line, but there is always a kind of a design reporting line. So would you see that still staying with the lead, or do you think if the lead is focused externally on kind of communicating, does that reporting line move more into the design ops, or does it stay kind of going towards the design lead?
I believe the design lead is still the reporting line. Design op person can be the strategic partner, but example I give people right now, I'm not a people manager. I'm an IC actually. I really consciously stayed in this space. Being a people manager has a different job than being an IC. Especially for when I'm passionately talking about design ops team of one. I'm a one-person team. When I'm a one-person team, there are a lot of work needs to be done, and that is a different focus. So the design operation partnership to the design leader doesn't have to be a people managing structure, and that's where I talk about the lead by influence rather than by authority.
Excellent. And I guess just kind of coming back to what you said at the start, people have been doing this role. They haven't called it design ops, but they've been doing these kind of things for a long time. So if there's anybody out in the audience who doesn't have the title of design ops, what are the things that you would recommend that they can do now to try and improve things without having the authority of kind of being a design ops leader?
Yeah, that is very common actually, how most people started as a design op. But more mature organization, larger organization, enterprise have the ability, is almost a luxury to hire design operations role. In many companies, people start from just doing the work. And to me, I believe the important thing is that do the work, find the partner within the design team, do the work with you, and tell that story. And to show success, why the organization need a design operations person and how this design operation can help the organization, help the product team, and help the design team to ship products and grow design team. And so doing it, experiments, and do small experiments, but importantly, tell that story. A huge part of my job is also telling about why we're doing things and what we're doing things and how that made a difference.
Excellent. That leads me on to my next one about success and metrics. And you mentioned, it slipped me now, was it 88 projects were touched by the office hours? Yes. I can't remember the exact number.
Exactly number.
So, perfect. How do you measure, how do you communicate success? So yes, that's the number of projects touched, but do you have any way of identifying that, yes, those projects had a beneficial outcome from it versus just, so what I'm trying to think is away from just a task base, we did X, Y, Z to more of the outcome. This is what was achieved, but how do you know what would have been achieved if you hadn't helped them?
Yeah, so here's the thing. That's why when I talk about the measurement, right, it doesn't have to be super scientific. It can be scrappy. 88, this is one factor of how we helped it. You can articulate that 88 projects, if we hadn't had this office hour, then these projects would just go out down by engineers and down by whoever can pick up a project and get it done. But now we have 88 projects that designers actually work on it, improved it. So this is one aspect. But there are other aspects of this whole office hour. People will bring in different kind of a project maybe, and designers say, oh, I know that I have a design system. I already have a component ready for you. They can just put it out very fast. So that goes to the other side of the measure, save money or save time for our engineers, for our product team when they don't have an embedded designer. So the measurement is never one dimension, and there's always multiple data points that we can leverage and to tell this whole story. And if you think about the entire span of the office hour, a few months, and then we touch 88 projects is just number of projects we touched. Then we also can look into how many out of these office hours, how many projects actually was able to utilize component libraries instead of just a one-off thing. And there's multiple ways to measure.
Excellent. Well, we've run out of time, and I could keep chatting about this. I love this topic, so I could keep chatting for a long time. But thank you, Z, and thank you for sharing. And if anybody hasn't seen the talk, highly recommend it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And jumping over to Homer. So welcome, Homer.
Thank you. How you doing?
Very good. And yourself?
Doing well, no complaints.
Excellent. So I loved your talk about accessibility. It's an area that I'm very passionate about, but I'm guilty of a lot of the sins that you called out in your talk. So again, just a reminder, if anybody has any questions, send them through and I'll ask Homer. But otherwise, I'm just going to kick off with some questions that I have. So my first one is, it's really often people aren't maliciously doing anything. They're not intentionally trying to break things. They just don't know about kind of what they should do and whatnot. And what they're doing is just looking at it going, okay, this works, tick, move on to the next thing. So how do you propose making people aware of the problems when they aren't even aware that they're making these mistakes?
By doing talks just like this. A big part of it, as you said, they're not aware. So it's the education that we have to do. A lot of people that I have mentored or spoken to throughout the years, especially a lot of people who come out of the boot camps. I'll ask them, what's your exposure to accessibility? And surprisingly, a lot of them say none. It may have been a slide the first day of class, or it may have been a bullet point on a slide the first day of class. And then we didn't touch it after that. This particular talk that I gave, I've been doing this for 4 years, and I've been doing it at different conferences. And every time I do it at a different conference, it always reaches someone else that's new. And that's because this particular topic is not actually discussed at the academic level where people are actually learning how to build websites. And then if you're self-taught, a lot of times you may not even come across this. So it's doing these talks, going out to events, just basically telling people the benefits of why it's important to build accessible products, around the world. And then also just explaining to them that it's not as challenging as you may think. If you understand HTML, you can start with the semantics, and from there you can start to build on. And like you said, yeah, a lot of us are guilty of, building inaccessible products. The div just really gets us. It's just a lot of understanding that we have learned some really bad practices along the way, but we have the tools to undo those practices. So, and it comes out through informing people just like this.
Excellent. So I like that mission. The next challenge, though, that I have, and you made a good point. Okay, so just looking at the pure volume of people, there are so many people that have a disability in the world, but it's still what I've seen people struggle with is there might be one engineer who's taking up the cause and they're trying to convince their company, yes, we need to invest in this. We need to go back. We need to fix things. And basically what you're doing then, it's a prioritization challenge of, should we go and fix and make sure that we're accessible, or should we build the next feature or fix other bugs? So do you have any tips on how to actually quantify? So you could do the whole, there's a lot of people, but Is there any way somebody could try figure out, are we losing money? Are we losing people? But then it could help them with their business case.
That part is always somewhat tricky, mainly because you can't, unless you specifically go out and you ask people if they have a disability and they are using your product. There's no real way for you to find out. And it's not like we can use technology to sniff out and see what type of devices they are using. And the reason you don't want to do that is because it's unethical. That type of information can lead to discrimination. So that's why you don't go into that. And then it could also be a violation of privacy laws, because that's dealing with somebody's health. So it's really hard unless they actually volunteer that information. But just approaching it, like I've had devs come to me and be like, look, I'm the only one on my team who really wants to do this. What's the best path forward for me to affect this change? And I tell them, fix one thing at a time. When you're in there working inside your code base, if you come across some code that, for instance, if you see a button that is not a button, but it's a span with an on click, that should be a button. Update it to be a button. Start to actually improve your code base as you touch it, as you go through. That way, one, it doesn't necessarily impact the timeline of the project that you're working on because you're doing the work while you're already scheduled to be in there. It's not like you just said, drop everything, go through and let's take every button throughout our application and upgrade it. You're making those small incremental changes. And then eventually you can start to show, hey, this part of our application, this is how it does not work with screen readers or assistive tech versus this other part of our application that we've made these small incremental changes to. This is how it benefits. And then you can start to show the company the benefits from that point. But to answer your question, yeah, it's somewhat difficult unless you actually get that information voluntarily from the individuals. I'm
thinking out loud here, and I don't know if this is possible or not, but a kind of a traditional, or not traditional, but the kind of the MVP approach would be, is there something that you could do a small experiment that would give big impact? So people, if they just said, look, we're going to fix this problem, we'll do a test, and if then you can see a difference, then that will be a good kind of feedback loop that they should keep investing. So is there something that you would tell people is the quick win? What's the number one most important thing that they should fix that they could try get a quick win?
Oh, wow. Semantic markup. Forms. You can get quick wins with forms because a lot of forms are often built incorrectly. They're labeled incorrectly. The tab focus is incorrect. You want to focus on logical reading order. The way that the form is marked up. If you use semantic elements correctly, then assistive tech will allow the user to actually go through and fill out the form correctly. If you place your labels and your error messages in the same proximity with the field that has the error, that will also reduce issues because now the user is not being distracted by a toast that's popping up somewhere else on the screen. It's definitely associated with the particular input where the error is. And if that messaging is clear enough to explain to them what they actually need to do, that also helps. But forms are a big space where you can definitely improve the UX for the user.
Excellent. And I'm going to shift to a different tack. So we've been relying on, in a way, Good Samaritans and people doing this voluntarily. Is the other approach worthwhile? So I've worked with airlines and I know that there's legal rules on how accessible an airline's website needs to be. Should those be broadened? Should the government come in and try to regulate, saying, like they do with buildings, you have to have an accessible ramp into a building?
It's funny you say that because there are already 70 countries that have some form of legal requirement for businesses to provide accessible technology or accessible products. 70. Right now the EU is leading that because every country in the EU has to abide by those rules. And a lot of them point back to or are modeled after the ADA laws that we have here in the United States. And then all of those similarly point back to the WCAG 2.0, I believe, at that time. So yeah, it is definitely a benefit of that. Here in the United States, there's definitely been an increase in litigation, lawsuits, and so forth, especially with the pandemic. Everyone was at home. Well, now that everyone's home, everyone's using their computers, it really started to show the cracks in a lot of products, accessibility support, because you had individuals who just could not complete a task that they sought out to do.
Yeah, no, it's interesting kind of see where the space goes. So I'm definitely in favor of a little bit of a mix of carrot and stick. But we're out of time, unfortunately. So thank you very much, Homer. Really love the Q&A. But don't go anywhere, because what we're actually about to do now is we're going to do a kind of a group conversation with the speakers. And this is something that we're trialing out and testing out new formats. We always try new things. But the idea here is we're going to welcome back Z and Kendall. And the idea here is I'm going to just kind of be quiet and sit in the background. And it's you guys, hopefully from seeing each other's talks and questions, you have questions for each other, and it's to try and get a conversation flowing. So does anybody have a question to start, or will I put somebody on the spot?
I can start, actually. I don't have a question, but I have a comment. So Kendall, everything you said about user research, our product team, applies to design operations. Everything you said. I thought that was really...
I was going to add a comment to say that I don't think our teams could run without design operations, that it really is that tool that, like you said, not a lot of teams know that they're doing it, but they're already doing it. And then once you actually apply the process to it, you're like, how did we live so long without it? So yeah, a lot of everything you mentioned resonated as well. I did have a question actually for Homer. So one of the things that your talk got me thinking about was, I took this remote exercise, or brought it, I guess, remote, and that can be a limiting factor for the participants that I'm able to test with. So I'm curious if you've seen any tools or unique ways of making sure that you're able to bring accessibility into research and make sure that even the way that you're researching is accessible.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the things that my team and I are doing right now, we're going through usability studies with our current application, and basically just looking for insight into how individuals who use assistive tech are actually, navigating through our products. And it kind of goes back to something that you mentioned earlier, where you said that all your participants were coming up with the same type of UI. They kept doing the same type of design. And that points back to when we are building out our applications, it's one thing to, like I said, to be innovative and things like that. And I had a quote in there from Jacob Nielsen about how individuals spend more time on other people's products and build those mental models about how your product should, or how a product or interface should actually work. And then they come back and they expect your product to do the same thing. Well, when we do these usability studies, we actually see that through the user testing that we do. So we get all the nice little data chunks and the feedback in pretty much the same way, and those human insights as to how they actually will use it. Then at the same time, myself and my team, those of us who are trained in ADA, we also provide the same insights, because accessibility updates don't just benefit individuals with disabilities. It also benefits the rest of us as well. So how does it affect our user experience when we're going through it? So those are the different things that we look for when we're doing our, individual studies and looking at the UX patterns inside of our applications.
I have a follow-up question on your comments there. You're talking about you go out to testing with real users and everything. And our team, where I've seen a lot of teams run into a budget issue, we don't have the opportunity to really reach out to the group of people or just even reach out to the panel members and everything. What would be your suggestion and the teams can go about to reach out to the real people, real user?
Honestly, you can start with your team. Every computer that we use has accessibility software built into it. So if you're on a Mac, you have VoiceOver. VoiceOver is a screen reader. If you can test your applications using VoiceOver to get an idea of how users would actually interact with your application that way, that's just fine. You don't have to have a super large panel of people, going through and testing your application. Is that great? Yes, it is, because obviously your sample size is larger, and then you also get a larger number of usability feedback about how your app actually works for people who have different modes of input. But for small teams, start with what you have. We already know it's really not feasible to even try to attempt to test against every permutation out there. You just can't. Screen sizes. I mean, think back to when we started building responsive websites. There was no way in the world we were actually going to be able to guess everyone's form factor straight out the gate. So we just had to allow, responsive to do exactly what it was going to do and then test based on that. Same thing with accessibility. You already have the basic tools, like I said, screen readers, VoiceOver on Mac, you have Narrator on Windows, or you can download JAWS or NVDA, which is an open source screen reader for Windows, and begin those tests. The other thing that's great to test with, your keyboard. Your keyboard alone will show you so many different issues from a usability perspective with your application than because if you start to just one thing, go to your application and press the tab key and see where you are. As you're pressing the tab key, look to see if you can find yourself or find where you are inside your UI. If you can't, then that means that no one else can. Not just people with disabilities. No one can figure out where they are. So if they don't use a mouse and all they use is a keyboard, that's an issue that you can fix. The other thing is it shows you where you have keyboard traps. So when someone is using a keyboard and they are actually trying to use your application, wherever they get stuck, that's a keyboard trap that prevents them from moving forward. So those are some really low entry ways of testing that have a large impact. And then there's also the browser plugins that you can use. My favorite, I like to use Axe from DQ. Install the plugin, run an automated test. Manual testing and automated testing go great together. Manual testing really shows, how the human is actually going to interact. The manual testing catches things from a programmatic standpoint. You can write code to test against these things. So I would recommend doing both of those, but low cost, low barrier to entry, but high impact. We can't hear you, Rory.
Apologies. I was just saying, I'm going to jump in because on DesignOps, Kendall, you mentioned that you have a lot of support there. Is there anything you can share? What kind of tools or support are you provided with that help you do your role?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just the organization. I mean, I really look at our DesignOps partners as the ones who kind of see everything. They know what's happening in the rooms that I'm not in. They maybe don't know the same depth that I would know if I was in that room, but they're able to look across everything and say, they're actually able to pull me into the rooms that I need to be in and say, hey, we need you over here. There's this work that's happening. So it just really highlights the amount of, I would stretch myself so thin without my DesignOps partners. Also just having that sounding board of, is this the right priority? What do you think? Well, you've been in the room with all the different priorities. You've seen all the other projects that are coming up. They're almost like synthesizing everything and saying, hey, we're seeing a lot of this happening over here. I think your team should prioritize these efforts. It's really just scaling the amount of work that anyone on the design team is able to do. I also look at the ways that they're able to create processes around the way that we work. I was in a meeting this morning with a design ops partner about what's our onboarding process. How do we create more of a process to it? How do we actually bring in the right information at the right time? And it's all the things that I know whenever I experience it, I'm like, this is painful. And I don't want to have to do it alone because it's just too much work to do alone. But when you've got the entire design org who has the same pain points and wants to solve it together, and then you have that person who's dedicated to helping you solve the problem, it makes the problem feel a lot smaller and a lot more attainable. And I just could go on and on about how much design ops really does help our entire organization move forward and just keep us on track, really.
I love that.
So we don't have a design ops team where I am. What would be the best way to kind of approach this topic within an organization to even establish this type of role?
I would say look within the team members and see who is actually really interested in doing more of these operation type of work. A design ops person is different from a designer, but benefits huge deal from being a designer coming from this background. That's why everything Kendall mentioned, everything you mentioned, is like, oh, that all apply. I can relate. I was a designer. I came from that background. Design ops person doesn't have to be a designer, but I definitely benefit from that human-centered design approach, everything to solve the design operations challenges. So look within the team. I would looking within the team, see who is interested in doing this kind of work and start to do more of the work, tell the story, and then see eventually if you have enough needs to really carve out a dedicated role. One of my slides when I was talking about it, if you look at the state of design ops, many organizations, especially even the large enterprise, the design ops team is very small comparatively speaking. It's a team of one, and proportional wise, I talk about one design ops person for 10 design practitioners ideal, but in reality, I know many design ops team of one are supporting much larger team, 50, 100, 200. I've seen all of those. So a lot of organizations.
That's so stressful.
Exactly. That's why prioritization is important. And that's why a lot of organizations don't have a dedicated design ops person, but there's always something we'll be interested in doing the work.
Good deal. Have you ever seen anyone within or worked within someone inside DevOps that was actually embedded with the design systems team?
So larger company do have design ops embedded in, say, a design system. Example I can think of, Salesforce and Adobe, they all have, when I talk about different kind of design ops, there's a product ops. They are embedded on the product team. I would see design system as one of the products, and they would have a dedicated, if team is large enough, they will have a dedicated design ops person.
Okay, we do.
And one of the things that I see, like, there's that kind of boomerang effect with organizations of throw out all centralized, now let's centralize again. And one of the concerns that I would have is the PMO of old, where it was this centralized team that told people how to do things, and they became the gate checker, and they were saying, oh, you didn't do this, and give you a slap on the wrist and things like that. So how do you avoid design ops becoming that kind of almost a blocker instead of an enabler?
Yeah, so that is a really good choice of words, blocker versus enabler. And I see the role for design ops. I partnership closely with our PMO group and everyone, all the ops team. And I came from a design background. So again, human-centered design approach is how we approach design operation. If you talk about many design operations practitioners, we're focused on the people's need, not the process per se. We improve process, but not processing for process. It's just a tool in a way. So we actually really care about what the people needs are, and we are the enablers rather than the blockers. And then we iterate, and I throw out there a lot of different ideas. They don't always work. And we try it out. They don't always work for real. And then I let our people tell me, it's like, let's work it out. If it doesn't work, tell me, let's make it to work for us. So that's the important thing. Help our team find out what works for us, not just propose a process.
I loved in your talk how you called that like experimenting, and just the subtle change in language around that it's not changing something, but it's experimenting. It almost brings a little bit more like openness to it. Because we face the same thing. I mean, every time you come up against a problem, you can say, well, we've done it this way a whole bunch and the problem is still here, so we should change it, but no one likes change. And there's something fun about, well, let's experiment with it. So I really love that framing in your talk.
Yeah, we like to refer. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, even it's a change management, but change is a scary word, and the experiment is a fun word.
Yes, it is. Yeah, we'll call them spikes, and spikes are meant to be experimental, but it is definitely aimed at, trying to figure out a way to affect change on a particular UI element or workflow inside the application. And then every now and then we'll also call them hacks as well, because everybody likes to hack. That's when you just get over in there, throw everything at it and break it and be like, yeah. And then you come back and be like, so what'd you learn? Be like, I have no idea, but we broke everything and it was amazing.
It's definitely the spirit of it, right? So build something, test it out, see if it works, test it, and iterate. So it's really product design principles, and that's what we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we run into that too with when we're working with really complex solves for accessibility. If we were building everything just straight out the gate with just raw HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, no problem. But in this day and age with single page apps, and then even with us designing custom widgets and things like that, a lot of those things, they're not native to the web. We are creating them. And, where tests show that someone may navigate it this particular way, we'll get a customer come back and be like, yeah, I couldn't use this because I do X, Y, and Z. I'm like, huh? How did you even find that? And then we'll have to go back and we iterate through to see if we can figure out different solutions that still work for this particular person who is navigating in another way, while still not negatively impacting everyone else who was using it, the way that we thought they would. And yeah, that part gets fun because, like I tell people all the time, accessibility doesn't have a silver bullet. What the solution you use over here may not be the viable solution that you use, here. You have to test and you have to iterate. And like I said, break things.
Yeah. That's so true for a lot of things that we do as well. I saw Catherine in the chat putting in, it's not one size fits all, right? So that applies to accessibility, applies to design operation as well. And I heard part of Kendall, your talk, you were talking about, you have this whole design the exercise, but you find people can't do it, and then you have to do it for them on the fly. So you can't move it, I will move it for you. You have to be able to adjust. And there's no one size fits all. There's always variables in our line of work.
So, Kendall, for you, when you notice that people were actually designing or building or expecting the same type of UI that you were already envisioning, how did that make you feel? Did it validate your ideas and give you at least some hope to make you feel like, yeah, we're on the right track, or was it a little bit deeper than that?
A little bit of both. It was a little bit, I think that there's a lot of different ways you can sometimes react to research insights. If I do a study and find out that exactly what our assumptions were, fantastic. We were on the right track. That's great. We now know that we were on the right track. If it's completely opposite of our assumptions, fantastic. We were wrong. We know that we're wrong.
We broke something.
So it's hard to ever get like disappointed, I guess, in the research insights, because I feel like there's always, my take on it is there's always something to be learned. And so I will say that the designs that they created still had some things that were unique. And what we were really getting at, I know that the entire study was around the designs, but it was really, for me and for the team, more than the designs. It was what went into it. What was the rationale? And that was the piece of the puzzle that we didn't have, because we knew what they were using, but we didn't know why it mattered to them, why it was important, why if we move something around, what impact was that going to have? We learned there are some things, don't touch them, don't move it. It's gonna be bad. Other things we have a little bit of flexibility for. And so it kind of opened up, the designs were the same, if not very similar, but now we know why what we created in the first place was working. And so any adjustments we make down the road, we know why we should keep certain things and where we actually have that flexibility to kind of mix it up a little bit.
Yeah. The important part of that is being able to capture that information and remember it down the line, so that when this whole project circles back again, because I've seen that happen before. So it's like you make a decision, time passes, it's like, oh yeah, why did we do this? Well, let's change that. And be like, no, that actually works. But if that all gets lost, you end up making people angry.
We were in
something.
It couldn't be more timely that you bring that up. I today was realizing like, wow, obviously this is very top of mind for me. I just had to talk about it. I'm very aware of the research. It's something that we're still referencing kind of lightly in conversation, but I realized like, I think it's time to resurface this. I think it's time to just share the deck again. And I actually ended up creating, there were a couple of different research efforts that we did that were all somewhat connected, and we were talking around the same things. And I've had a couple meetings the last few weeks that just felt like we were going in circles. We're talking about the same thing over and over, same topic of discussion. Yeah. And so I just went through all my different research studies that I was aware of, and I just pulled the slides that I thought were most important for the team. Because I know it's overwhelming to send a deck and be like, just look at it. It's 30 pages, no big deal. I know you've got tons of time on your hands. So I only pulled the slides that I thought were actually important, but I pulled them all together into a single deck so that it was like, you can see the common thread through all of these different efforts. And it gained a lot of traction because I think it was in a way that the team was ready to revisit the insights, but it was telling the story the way that they needed it to be told at this point in the project. So it's tough. I think it's one of the hardest things for researchers is, you always fear that your research is going to live on that proverbial shelf and never get looked at again. And so I think it's our responsibility to continuously surface it so that we come back to the rationale of why did we make this decision. Also have to be open, though, that times change, technology changes, user behavior changes. And so the insights that we had 2 years ago, they may not be relevant anymore. And so it's recognizing when do you, stick to what you've learned, and when do you say, maybe we should dig in again and see if this is still the case.
Yeah, I remember something along those lines. How you said what was good then may not be good now. I remember working on an e-commerce app, and we had horizontal slides, and our users had no problem with the horizontal sliding. And that was also back around the time when, everybody was worried about the fold. Don't go below the fold. Now it's people have no problem vertically scrolling, but if you throw anything with horizontal in there, and they're ready to just like trash your app on Twitter and cancel you and the whole nine. So yeah, I felt that one.
Definitely iterative, right? So we learn and then continue learning and continue iterate. The same thing for operations, the same thing. What works for 5 people's team won't work for 10 people, 30 people, 100 people. You just have to keep changing accordingly.
Yeah, that's true.
And Z, so just on that research question, I find that fascinating as well. Like, how do you communicate and how do you give an end life to research. Do you have is there a separation in your world between kind of research ops and design ops? Are they the same thing? And if so, how do you tackle this problem of communicating your research?
That's a really interesting question, because there is the title or the role as a research op, and there's a very specific needs for the research team. But again, that's even another level of luxury for enterprise, that you have to really have a huge team. First of all, you have to have a decent size of a research team to even dedicate a research ops person, but it's really all operations. There's no definitive cutoff line. I talk to Kendall. I would if I were the research ops person, I would go talk to Kendall and say, hey, let's talk about this. Is this the end life of this particular research? And we capture there. We leave it in some of our repository tools, and people might dig it out later. But the thing is that it's, again, a lot of work for designers. It's a conversation. And then we iterate on it and then make an adjustment. There's no time design ops to say, hey, we need to cut this off or anything. But as an ops person, part of the thing Kendall mentioned that is that I get to see different parts of the design organization. I see what the designers are doing, what the researchers are doing, what our managers are doing. So I connect the dots. So that's the role of the design operations person. We're the bridge, we're connecting dots. So we tell people, hey, Kendall, this research is really useful. This team could use it. Can you share with them? Or they have some other research, and I think this one might be obsolete, that you two should talk. And that's the design operation and research operations role. Oh, you're on mute.
Yep, I was going to say absolutely, completely agree. And I think so we have a research ops team, but obviously the way that I love design ops, we could never have enough of them, because that's one thing that we struggle with, is kind of that end of life research. When is it truly done? We have a repository, but how do you maintain it? How do you keep it up? And that's something that I've been working on with a couple colleagues over the last year, is your repository is only as good as it is up to date. And so how do we make sure that we're encouraging people to update it? How can we leverage our ResOps partners to help us make those connections and say, hey, I saw this person is doing this study. You did that study last year. Can you guys chat and see if you're not duplicating the same work? Because that's also frustrating. And so just having those folks that you can really communicate with and figure out, also, it's okay if you're doing duplicate work sometimes. I mean, you definitely want to make sure you're still having impact, but I've run studies that there was almost an exact parallel study run a couple of years ago, and the insights are the same. And it goes back to what I said before, like, awesome, that's great. Our assumption, nothing major has changed, business as usual, it's okay. If something major happened, awesome, great. We learned that something major happened, we can adjust. Like, it's really hard to have bad research. But it is so important to make sure that if you have a central repository, that it's up to date, or you have partners who can help connect those dots to make sure that the research is getting the visibility. Because if nobody knows it happened, a tree falls in the wood, no one hears it, if no one knows that the research happened, they can't actually action on it.
I'm always the one I was going to say, I'm always the one reaching out to people, say, can you share this? Can you share this? Can you talk to people about this?
Is there anything on that discoverability side? Because I hear this all the time, that as you said, your biggest fear is you do the research and it goes and it sits on the shelf over there and nobody references it. But a lot of times people don't know that the research exists. So how do you help with that discoverability? Do you have particular, is it a Word kind of document style approach? Is it graphical? How do you kind of structure it, and then how do you communicate it?
Yeah, so we have a dedicated repository that I think the research team knows about. So it's great for us. We have a tool, we can go and check ourselves, but we're not the target audience for this. It's hard. I think one of the ways that I've tried to tackle this is to be the squeaky wheel in the room. And so I attend, whenever possible, I'll try and attend our design crits. And if designers are showing work, that's maybe when I'll share, hey, we did some research around the same topic, let me send it to you. And if I can, create that space so that everybody knows that there was research on that topic, maybe that's the point that they reach out to me and say, do we have research on this other topic? I'll do the same thing in meetings. I'll just use the Zoom, chat feature and just be like, here's the research study, here you go. Like while people are talking about it, just so that it fits also in context. That's a lot easier, is when it's contextually relevant. You're more interested to look at it versus we also have a monthly newsletter that we send out, which is fantastic. We see spikes in our research report activity whenever we send out that newsletter, but it lacks that context and the contextual relevancy. And so it's really trying to figure out, it's better to have it out there than not at all. So figure out those ways, whether it's a repository or a newsletter, Slack channels, whatever that mechanism is, but then continuing to be the advocate for your own research or the research that your teammates have done, and being the person to voice it and say, hey, this person actually is the one that led it. They can give you more information, but it kind of takes everyone together, constantly reminding each other that it exists, because if no one's talking about it, that's when it's really dead on the shelf.
True indeed.
And is there any tips for, so instantly my head always comes to product, like how could you turn this into a product? Relying on people is a point of failure. So have you, because I agree at the moment, and that's how I've seen it in a lot of places, it does come down to the advocates constantly kind of jumping in and chiming in. But in my head, I'm trying to think team topologies. I don't know if you've read that, but you want to have X as a service, so people can self-service rather than relying on others. So is there anybody you've seen doing this well, or aware of anybody kind of really getting self-service research?
Well, I can say one thing that we did to, as I mentioned before, like having that repository, it's only as valuable as it is up to date. And one of the things we noticed is one of the teams in our org, we just didn't have any research from them. And I was like, I know you're doing research. I know, you guys must be busy. What's going on? And they had developed their own process for their own repository that was kept separate. And it worked for them. They had a process, it worked for them. They had a cadence, they were keeping it up to date, and they were sharing it with their stakeholders. But the issue that we saw was, I didn't know what was happening. I am sharing this tool with my, colleagues and connections. And if they didn't know that this research even existed, we're just back at the same place. And so at first we thought about, well, what if we just ask them to stop that and just use our tool? Nobody likes change. So instead we thought, well, they already have a thing, it's working for them. That's amazing. That's the hardest part, is to get that process going. We should not ask them to change. And we actually they were using a Google Sheets spreadsheet to basically capture all their information. The repository we have is a glorified Google Sheets with a better UI. And so we just built a script to bring the two of them together. And so it was one of those examples of meet people where they're at and figure out what they're already doing and just build into that. And so I think no matter what the tool is, no matter, there's a lot of companies that are doing repositories, and I know, mixed success, because again, it comes down to making sure that people are actively updating. And so the biggest thing we've been trying to figure out is, well, where is the best moment to introduce that? And so what we're going to experiment with this year is we send out these monthly newsletters. Maybe that's the right time to say, hey, you're already doing a quick summary of your research, post it here and here. It's just, one extra step, but it's already in that same process of what they're used to doing. So I think the biggest thing is just figuring out where people already are and build into their processes, and then figure out how to refine from there, and whether that's a tool or anything else. But the hardest part is getting people to change. And so maybe don't make them change. Or slowly, gradually change. Yes, yeah.
Is there a template issue as well? Like, how is there a template for writing research? Because it's kind of so different. So is there a standardized way you can do that?
You can make a template for anything. So we do, luckily, our ResOps team, amazing. They've created some templates for us that really help us get our research to at least look consistent. That's another thing of meeting people where they are. If your research looks totally different every single time a product manager looks at it, like that's a learning curve that you're also adding to the mix. And so thinking about the ways that you introduce consistency and how you're communicating information. At one point in time, we did have a script that was built into that template. So a Google script that would scrape the template and pull the right information in. There does come a point when if you over automate everything, then you run into bugs and having to fix the bugs. And is it, actually meeting the goal you set out to achieve initially? And so it's an ever changing process. We're always looking at ways to optimize. I think the biggest thing though is less is enough. Like, I think we always aim for we need to get all of this information in there. It's not valuable unless we have all of this. If we just had a link to the research report, that's enough, because that's more than we have today. And so really figuring out that right size of information, and start with good. Don't go for perfect or even great. Just start with good.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because when you were talking about how you were pulling in the data from this side and then your side, I'm like, how does that actually look? How does that come in if they're doing a different method than you guys? How does that even match up? But like you said, if you have a link, you can go, you can see, you don't have to worry about formatting and everything like that. That's good.
Yeah, we had to do a little bit of, Excel mapping or Google Sheets mapping to say, okay, this field, you call it this, we call it this. There's a bunch of fields that are empty. That's okay. We have space. It's all that matters. So.
And I'm sitting over here thinking, as I'm picturing this, I'm like, good grief, what does that cognitive load look like?
Oh, it's not pretty. It's not. And that's a challenge in and of itself too, is, we also recognize that for it to be a tool that we want other people to use, it also needs to be usable. There's some irony in that we're creating this tool that's not necessarily usable, and we're user experience researchers. And there's a lot that goes into culture change and organizational change. And again, that's where our design ops partners are incredible at helping us figure out what are those small experiments to run. This, honestly, our repository update has been basically a year-long experiment of constantly iterating and getting more feedback. But it is in a place where it's good enough. And I've had people reach out to me recently and say, hey, where can I find research? And I at least have a place to send them, because otherwise it was me searching through all the research I was aware of. But that's a huge gap. And that also means that knowledge leaves every time somebody leaves the company. And so this is at least a place, not a beautiful place, but it exists, and it's a great place for us to start.
If there's any product people out there watching, this looks like an opportunity space that's ripe for disruption.
I am so fighting the urge to tell you what we do at the company that I work for, because we literally solve that problem. That's what our software does.
Ah, there you go. Lovely segue and plug. Check out Guru. But yeah, we're almost at the end. Is there any last question that anybody has, a burning question they want to ask one of the other participants? No? I'll ask one just randomly. What's everybody's opinion now of, because you touched on it, Kendall, of it's all remote. So now, are we going back to hybrid in-person research? Is it, what's the future?
I think we have to have some version of, from a researcher's perspective, and this is separate from me as an employee, because I definitely enjoy my morning commute down the stairs. But as a researcher, there's a lot, and you think about Uber especially. So I joined in April of 2020, fresh into the pandemic. I've only ever known remote research at Uber, but our product is so human. Our product is literally putting two strangers in a car together in a lot of cases. And so there's a lot about the actual experience that I just haven't been able to fully understand, aside from myself as a passenger. And so we have to look at some ways to make sure that we can get back to that in-person research, because there's a lot of nuance that we're missing. And without that, we are potentially creating products that aren't actually working for our users because we're creating products that we think work for them as we're designing them at home, not in context. So there has to be a balance. One of the things I love about remote research is I do get to talk to people all over the world. And so I'm talking to people in rural cities that maybe if I was conducting research out of our office, they wouldn't come in because it's such a burden to actually reach them. And so there's plenty of pros and cons, but there's a lot of nuance that we're missing, that getting back into the world safely and conducting that in-person research is really going to help us close some of the gaps.
Excellent. Well, that's it for time for this conversation. I really enjoyed that. I thought it was a great kind of mix of jumping into all the different areas. So once again, just thank you to Homer, Z, and Kendall.
Thank you for having us.
It was nice meeting all of you.
Nice meeting you all.
Thank you so much for that. And, as Rory would say, we could have kept going with that conversation as well. And that's what I kind of love about these panel discussions. You're asking these questions, with different, roles in the team, and just getting to know each other's roles and challenges and how we can build on our own organizations and teams. But that is a wrap for tonight. Thank you all to everyone who attended, to all the speakers. We've gotten a lot of learnings. I have my little notebook here with all my notes, and I have my main things that I learned. One of the things I pulled from today is, if you're looking to test or gather data for research, but have limited budgets, but looking for high impact, what we've learned today is always use your resources. So test with your team or test with your own equipment. The other thing I pulled as well is, starting your design ops in your own organization. Always, look into the skill set of your team and the interest as well. And it's a good way to kind of figure out how to direct it and who you have kind of on board. The other thing is that no one likes change. But what you could do is reframe the language. I love the idea of changing change, the word change, into experiment. I think it goes a long way, and it really reframes our mindsets to it. And lastly, the last thing that Kendall said that really stuck out to me is, start with good. It's a good way to, improve from there and experiment. So that's my learning, but I always love to hear your learnings from tonight. So do share your thoughts with us on our LinkedIn or on our Twitter. I always love hearing those as well. But our UXDX EMEA is one of the largest product development events in Europe over the last 7 years. And we're excited to bring it to New York on the 24th to 26th of May. We've already have announced speakers from BuzzFeed, Disney Streaming, Shopify, Peloton, Twitch, and Microsoft, just to name a few. So if you really enjoyed tonight is a taster of what you can expect at the conference in May. So do check out our agenda at uxdx.com. And as a thank you for supporting us grow our community, we're offering a discount code for all of the attendees tonight. Tickets are currently at its early bird prices, and with the community discount, it'll be the lowest it can get. So just add the code community10 when you purchase your tickets on the website. So again, thank you to everyone for joining us here tonight. Hope you enjoyed our discussions and learned something new. And as I said at the top of the show, we'll all be going to GatherTown now, where you can chat with the speakers and the other attendees tonight. My team will post a link on the chat box and also on UXDX Slack. But from the UXDX team and myself and the speakers tonight, have a good evening and stay safe.